In this video, I'll be philosophizing on critical thinking. Critical thinking concerns itself, ironically, with clear thinking and clarification and clarity, satisfying the meaningful criteria brainstormed from only some meaningful criteria to satisfy the only some meaningful criterion in order to satisfy the appropriate internal and or external conditions as a must be good enough and necessarily necessary conditions, satisfy internal and or external validity to think more critically in relation to existing priors. Certain existing priors are more meaningful to communicate on existing facts logically, in contrast to, and should never include, non-existing facts and or non-existing meaningful communications, as to mean that all non-existing meaning within one's perception is not meaningful and instead vague. And vagueness holds emptiness, most concerned to clarification. To clarify vagueness within direct perception means one may communicate the intercategorical and or intercategorical effectivenesses and or efficiencies, improving the intercategorical and or intercategorical effectivenesses and efficiencies within one's meaningful communications, to clearly communicate with crystal clarity the communications most meaningful to the self, in thinking creatively, to engage critical thought, filling in gaps in meaningful information whereby existing prior had existed, be it unknown unknowns and or vagueness. One is able to reduce the fallacious thought, communicating clearly one as one means in relation to what one means, defining the most appropriate communications one means to communicate on, instead of spurious relationships unrelated to the most meaningful concerns one either should have and or does have in relation to the communication, to satisfy certain underlying psychological needs, not all and or any psychological needs, be it this is impossible and or would be exhausting and or would be meaningfully some counterproductive approach to truly increase the intercategorical and or intracategorical ineffectivenesses and or inefficiencies, less meaningful to crystal clear communications, in comparison to increasing the intracategorical and or intercategorical effectivenesses and or efficiencies, clarifying the weak points within one's communications and or identifying the key points most meaningful to capitalize on the intercategorical and or intercategorical effectivenesses and or efficiencies to meaningfully satisfy certain existing some underlying psychological needs. Not all, be it that more meaningfulness is derived from the inferences into improving the intercategorical and or intracategorical effectivenesses and efficiencies conducted in relation to the satisfaction of exclusively certain underlying psychological needs, to the exclusion of the other psychological needs less meaningful to one's current moment-to-moment, future-oriented experiential encounters with mind-body connections, in relation to direct perception as it pertains and or concerns distinctions within perception of deprivations, distinguishing distinct, existing, possible, probabilistic, never improbabilistic, as to mean improbable and or impossible, existing and or never non-existing, as non-existing is counterproductive, psychological needs, to allow one to satisfy certain psychological needs most meaningfully, with the clearest communications within one's meaningful utterances of thought, clarifying areas of vagueness, allowing for more creative thinking, connecting more practical wisdom to the soundness of one's thought that works to be able to satisfy underlying psychological needs, improving the intracategorical and or intercategorical effectivenesses and or efficiencies to be able to meaningfully satisfy the direction of desired meaningful effect one is optimistically truth-seeking in relation to truth-seeking processes, engage in critical thinking, optimizing one's subjective well-being as a byproduct of having engaged in clearest critical thought. That's all I want to say for this video. Hope you have it. I also want to keep looking at this episode.